Hey guys, what's going on? It's Dave with Evil Eye Gaming. Today we're going to continue on with our third-person shooter AI, and we're going to cover the third branch that we have, the heavy tree. Now, I've decided to go ahead and make a change to the heavy tree. Instead of being a grenade launcher, I'm going to be using a sniper rifle. And the reasoning behind that all plays down to the player's gameplay experience. I had already tested it out. And one of the issues that I found with using a grenade launcher is it doesn't give the player much time to react to it. Unfortunately, we're limited on animations that are available to us. We don't have any diving or dodging or any way to get out of the blast radius quickly. And this would create a huge problem on the player's part because they're going to be hit with damage and they're not going to have any quick movement in order to get them away from that damage. And this brings up a really important topic that I want to mention about developing your own game. And one of the first things that you really have to do in making a game that's really important and that this emphasizes is the fact that you can't lock yourself into having certain things in a game. There's going to be some point where you're going to come along and there's going to be something that you really want to add into the game, but you're not going to have the time, the resources, or the money to accomplish whatever you need to accomplish. And if you're looking into just getting into games or looking to get into the gaming industry, this is a reality of any kind of project, whether it be gaming or software or otherwise. There are only a certain amount of things that you can do within the time and the restraints that you have available to you. So there's going to be a point where you're going to have to end up giving up things in order to make the best possible game that you can. So one thing you should definitely take away from this is don't hog tie yourself to things when creating a game. Really, the worst thing you can do is tie yourself down to something and either not be able to accomplish it because of restrictions within the game engine or not having the materials or the time or the money to accomplish something, and you're going to end up wasting a whole lot of these resources on something that you can't add into the game anyway. So as you're progressing through your game, be ready to give up things and be ready to not have everything you want. And especially if you're starting out, you have to learn that really fast. There are a lot of people who will get hung up on something and trying to make it work when it just doesn't work. And either they'll shoehorn it in and it'll make the experience for the player that much worse, or they'll end up giving up on it and you're going to be dead in the water at that point. So game development tip of the day is don't restrict yourself to absolutely have something. When you go into a project, be ready to get rid of pretty much everything but the core gameplay itself. Other than the core gameplay, everything is extra and it adds something to the game. But if it's not necessary to make the game, you have to be able to give it up when you run into something that is not going to allow you to complete that. So in order to make these changes, I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to open up our characters folder. We're going to go into our enemy characters and open up our base enemy character blueprint. So I have to go into the construction script first. And this is where we end up spawning the grenade launcher. So on our switch combat type enum, where we spawn the skeletal mesh for the grenade launcher, I'm going to go ahead and we're going to swap this over to the sniper rifle. And we'll go ahead and compile and save that. Then we're going to go back into the event graph, and we're going to rename this fire grenade launcher event. And I'm going to call it instead fire sniper rifle. And now that we're firing a sniper rifle, we can actually do something very similar to the shotgun and the rifle in our behavior tree, as well as within our player character here. So for firing the sniper rifle, the first thing I'm going to do is we're going to right click and we're going to get our isFiring variable, or we can drag it out from the variable pane to the left here and get that. And we want to check to see if we're already firing. And we want to check to see actually if we're not firing. So I'm going to put in a not operator, and we'll connect that up to our branch. Next, we're going to go ahead and set our isAiming variable. So that way our character pops up out of cover. We're going to go ahead and set our isFiring variable. And we're going to set both of these to true. So we'll make sure the boxes are checked. And then we're going to go ahead and we're going to post in a delay. And then for this delay, in order to kind of randomize the fire, I'm going to right click and search for a random float in range. And we're going to go ahead and plug this into the duration. And then for the range here, I'm going to set it between 2 as the minimum and 3 as the maximum. And then once this delay completes, we want to go ahead and check to see if we're still firing. We want to make sure that after this delay finishes, that isFiring has not been set back over to false. So we're going to go ahead, we're going to grab isFiring, and we're going to get it. We're going to put in a branch and hook up our isFiring to the branch. And now we can actually go ahead with firing the weapon. So we're going to grab our weapon mesh. And we wanted to drag out and play animation. And we'll connect that to the true of our branch. And then for the animation to play, we're going to search for the fire sniper rifle. Next, we're going to go ahead and we're going to drag out our calculate projectile info. And then we're going to want to put in a spread. So we have a variable here for a rifle spread. I'm going to create a new variable, and we'll call it the sniper rifle spread. And we'll make it a float. And we'll go ahead and plug this into our spread value. Now, the next thing we would do at this point is spawn our projectile, but we haven't created our projectile yet. So let's go back to our main window. We're going to go into our weapons and our projectiles folder. And then off of our base projectile here, we're going to right click and create a child blueprint class. And we'll call this the sniper rifle projectile underscore BP. And we'll go ahead and open this up real fast. And then for the particle system here, I believe there is a sniper rifle particle in here. Which there is. There's a sniper rifle tracer light. So I'm going to go ahead and put that in. And we ended up scaling this disproportionately in the base. So I'm going to give this a complete... I'll set the values to 0.5. We'll see how we like that. And then we'll go ahead, and it seems a little bit big. And this looks really weird to me. It looks like a puck. But I think this might supposedly trace off the back end of a round. But it's going to be moving pretty quickly, so we're not really going to have to pay a whole lot of attention to that. So let's actually make it 0.3 on the scale all around. And I'm going to once again reposition it so it sits in the center of the collision capsule that we have. So we can go ahead and compile and save this and close. And we'll go back into our enemy character blueprint. So from our calculate projectile info, we can drag out and we can go ahead and spawn actor from class. And the class is going to be our sniper rifle projectile. We'll plug our projectile spawn info into our spawn transform. Set the collision handling to always spawn, ignore collisions. And then for the instigator, we'll search for a reference to the self and plug that into our instigator. Then finally, This looks like it is returning a sniper rifle projectile blueprint reference. So as I mentioned before with the other projectiles, I don't know why it does this, but you may have to cast this to the base projectile class. So we're going to drag off of the return value here, and we're going to search for the set damage info. And then we're going to have to actually set the values of the damage. So I'm going to take our base weapon stat here of the damage min, and we'll get that, and we'll get the damage max. And we want the sniper rifle to be a higher damage than the assault rifle. It's going to be a slower fire weapon, so it's going to have a greater damage impact on our player. So I'm just going to take this and I'm going to multiply it by another float. And I'm going to multiply it by 2, and then plug that into our damage min. And then I'm going to duplicate this multiplication. And we're going to go ahead and plug that into our damage max. And the firing sniper rifle is only going to be a one-time event each time, so we're not going to need a timer in order to go ahead and set a repeating event with it. So one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take this clear timer by handle, and I'm going to break the links. And I'm going to move this to the end of the chain up here. And I want to check to see if this is actually a valid item before we go ahead and call the clear timer. So I'm going to search for is valid. And we'll put in a branch. And we'll plug the is valid into that branch. So that way we're not trying to clear a timer handle that doesn't exist. And lastly, one thing you might have noticed, if you went back and set the AI character to the assault, when it went to fire the shotgun, it ended up breaking the shotgun firing. What it's ended up doing is, since we changed up the event that calls the fire weapon or the task in the AI and the way that it functions, what's going to happen is it ends up calling this fire shotgun event over and over, and it keeps resetting this timer by event, and it's causing the AI enemy to fire basically rhythmically without any breaks. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to first get our is firing, and we're going to go ahead and make sure we're not firing, and we're going to throw in a branch. And we want to check to see if is firing is set. Now, if the is firing is not set, we want to go ahead and set is firing. So we'll grab our is firing and we will set that. And we'll set it to true. And then to handle the enemy turning around, I'm actually going to go ahead and I'm going to throw in a delay here. And I'm going to set this initial delay to 2 seconds. And then once again, since we have a delay involved, we want to go ahead and check again to see if we are firing. So we're going to go ahead and get our is firing, and we'll put in a branch. And if that is true, we are going to go ahead and use the is aiming variable. And I'll show you in a little bit how we're going to use this in the animation graph in order to fix the issue with the player kind of turning to the side as soon as you shoot him if he's facing away from you. So we're going to go ahead and set our is aiming variable. And we're going to set it to true. And then we'll go ahead and plug that into our shotgun burst that already exists. So this is going to fix the issue with the character turning and shooting right away. And it's also going to fix the timing issue with how we changed up the behavior tree, and it's going to continually call this fire shotgun. So that's going to finish up in the base enemy character. So I'm going to compile and save this. And we can close out of the enemy character. And then in our enemy characters folder, I'm going to go ahead and open up our base enemy NMBP. And first we're going to go into the event graph. And we are getting an isAiming variable here. So we're going to use this variable to determine whether or not our character is going to use his aim offset. So in our actual state machine here, I'm going to go ahead and open up our idle. And I'm going to drag this off to the side a little bit. And we're going to go ahead and right click and search for the blend poses by bool. And we're going to plug our rifle aim offset here into the true pose. We're going to grab our isAiming variable and we're going to plug this into the active value. And then we have to handle what happens if it is false. And so we're going to have to get this to work with out the aim offset. So I'm just going to take this play enemy idle and I'm going to go ahead and duplicate it. And we're going to go ahead and plug this into our false pose. So when our character is not aiming, he is not going to use the aim offset. And when isAiming is true, he's going to go ahead and use that aim offset. So we'll go ahead and compile and save. And we're going to have to do the same thing back in our movement branch here. So we'll go ahead and open up the movement. And we're going to grab these and we're going to drag it off to the side here. And once again, we're going to blend by bool. And we're going to plug this into the true pose. And then we're going to go ahead and grab our isAiming. And we'll plug this into the active value for the blend. And then we're going to grab this enemy movement blend space. And we're going to duplicate it. And we're going to plug this into the false pose. And we'll plug the result into the final animation pose. And once again, we'll compile and save. So now when the character is moving around the map, he is not going to use the aim offset unless they are actively aiming, which is set by those firing events that we created. So at this point, we can go ahead and close out of our base enemy blueprint, go into our AI folder, and I'm going to open up the behavior tree. And right now we have it set up so that we come from our combat selector. We go into an assault selector, a cover selector, and a heavy selector, but we don't really need a third branch for this. The only real two different branches that we're going to need is either whether we're in the assault phase or we're not in the assault phase. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this heavy sequence. And then in our cover sequence here, I'm going to select the decorator. And we're going to set this so the key query is not equal to, and we'll set the key value to assault. And I'm going to change the node name to not assault. So what's going to happen is when it comes to the selector, it's going to check to see if our combat status is assault. If it is assault, we'll run this tree. If it's not assault, it's going to go ahead and run this tree. But we do want the enemy character to behave a little bit differently if he's got a heavy weapon. So the first thing we're going to need to do is change a little bit in what we do to find cover. So I'm going to go ahead and double click on the find cover BTT, and that'll open it up for us. We're going to need to go into the check rotation and distance function. And in the bottom section here, this bottom commented area, this is where we're checking to see if the cover we're trying to go to is at least 5 meters away from the player character's location. Well, we need this to be a little bit more variable for us. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to right click on where we have the 500 and I'm going to go ahead and promote that to a variable. And I'm going to call this the min distance away from player. And we want to go ahead and click on the eye to make this public so that we can set it from the behavior tree. And we can hit compile and save. And it will retain that 500 min value that it had in there before as the default. And that's the only change we need to make to our find cover task. So I'm going to go ahead and close our find cover task. And now we're going to have to take a look at our find cover. And it's going to have this new minimum distance away from player. So now we need to create a different path based on whether or not we are a cover type or a heavy type. So I'm going to drag off of our sequence here. And I'm going to search for a selector. And we'll drag this down here. I'm going to connect up our selector into this find cover. And we want to go ahead and right click on our find cover and add a decorator for the blackboard. And this is where we're going to check to see what our combat type is. So I'll check our combat type and we'll see if it's equal to cover. If it's equal to cover, we'll go ahead and perform it with the default 500 min distance. And then I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this. And we'll plug this into the selector as well. And I'm going to go ahead and first we'll click on the blackboard base condition. And we're going to set the key value for this one to heavy. So it's going to be checking to see if the combat type is equal to heavy. If it is, we're going to find cover. But we're going to change the minimum distance away from the player. And we're going to make it a longer distance. So we'll set it to, let's say, 2,000. So that'll put them at least 20 meters away from our player character. And really, that's all we're going to need to do to our behavior tree right now to have it work functionally. So if we enter the combat status, it's going to check to see if the combat type is equal to assault. If it's not, it's going to run the sequence to the right here. It's going to set us to not taking cover. It's going to stop firing our weapon like before. But instead of finding cover, it's going to run one of two find covers based on whether or not we are set to cover or we're set to heavy. If it's cover, we'll be running it the same way that we were running before. If it's set to heavy, we just essentially change the minimum distance away from the player that the cover has to be. And while we're at it, and I'm thinking about it, we can go ahead and open up the find cover task again. And we also have a distance in here. If we go back to the main event graph of how far we're looking for. There's this max distance to cover. Let's go ahead and we'll make this public and we'll compile and save it. So that way we can actually set how far the character looks for cover. So if we go back to our behavior tree here, we'll now see that there's a max distance to cover and it's exposed. So for our find cover BTT for when we're in the heavy, we can actually up this value. So let's make it a little bit longer. We'll call it 5,000 instead of the 3,000 before. So if we have a cover character, he's going to look for 30 meters and he's going to find a cover that is at least 500 or 5 meters away from the player. If we have a heavy character, he's going to search for a distance of 50 meters and find a piece of cover that is at least 20 meters away from our player character. So we can go ahead and save. We'll go back to our main window here and I'll select our AI that is in the map. And let's go ahead and we'll set him over to our heavy. Let's go ahead and save and we're going to hit play. And we'll see at this point, he does have a sniper rifle in his hand. So we'll go ahead and we'll shoot at him and we'll see what he does. He ends up running for the farthest piece of cover away from us. And if we go ahead and run past him, he is going to go ahead and run away and find a distant piece of cover that he can go ahead and take it into. Now he's still going to do the same thing for now. If there's no cover available, he is going to end up running at the player. And I don't see necessarily a big problem with that. Might want to change it up so that if there's no cover available, he'll stand in place, look at the player, and shoot him. But considering the way that I plan on laying out the levels, there's no real need to do that. And the one thing we'll notice also is that the sniper fire isn't actually very accurate for right now. So what we're going to end up having to do is we're going to make a minor change to calculating the projectile information. So I'll go ahead and we'll close out our behavior tree here. And we're going to go back into our enemy characters, and we're going to open up our base enemy character blueprint. And we'll open up the calculate projectile info function. Now, originally I'd set this up so that it uses the muzzle arrow's direction to make sure that our enemy is generally firing in pretty much the right direction. We want them looking at the player character. But now that we have it set up so that they are looking in the proper direction, we can get rid of firing to the muzzle arrow where it's pointing. So we're going to get rid of this get forward vector. And we're going to actually end up firing directly towards the player. So we have a reference to our player character. We're going to drag this out and get him. So we're going to drag out from our player character. And we're going to get socket location from the mesh. And we'll just drag this out a little bit more to make some room. So it's going to go ahead and call on the mesh. And then we're going to get the socket location of the mesh. And for the socket name, I'm going to use the same one that we used before, which is the spine _03. And once again, if you're using a custom mesh, you're going to have to look at that mesh and make sure that the mesh uses either the same name or find out what the name of the bone is that's about mid-chest level. And so I'm going to go ahead and I'll drag off of our get world location here. And we're going to go ahead and find the look at rotation. And from our find look at rotation, we're going to get the forward vector. And we'll drag off and make a little bit more room here. And then we can go ahead and plug this get forward vector into our cone direction in our random unit vector and cone. And we can bring it back a little closer together. So what we're going to do now, instead of using the forward pointing direction of the muzzle, is we're going to find the look at rotation between the muzzle and the spine bone on the player character. We'll get we get the look at rotation, we get the forward vector, and then we go ahead and calculate our random unit in the vector. Get the rotation and plug that into our transform. So we can go ahead and compile and save this. And I think I forgot one thing in the fire sniper rifle here. We did end up creating the fire rifle sniper rifle spread number here, but we didn't assign a value to it. And I'm going to use the spread of 1 meter per every 50 meters forward, using the inverse tangent of 1/50. That comes out to, I'm going to round a little bit here, to 0.02. So I'm going to set that value, and we're going to go ahead and compile and save. And I'm going to go ahead and put a comment box around our sniper rifle info here. And the other ones are just fire and the name of the weapon, so we'll call this fire sniper rifle. And we'll go ahead and compile and save that. And if we go back to our map and we hit play to test it out, we can go ahead and fire at him. And he'll go ahead and find cover that is a longer distance away. And let's see how accurately he fires. All right, so he's pretty much hitting our player character. So that is definitely a good. And we'll take cover again, and we'll see him pop up in a moment. And he goes ahead and he fires at us and then goes back into cover. So that is working as it should. And now the question comes down to what happens if we have more than one of these AIs in a section at a time. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to duplicate a few more of these cover boxes around. All right, so we have more area for the enemies to take cover in here. And I'm going to go ahead and we're going to duplicate this base enemy character as well. So I'm going to put a few more of these guys into the scene here. We'll just kind of space them out a little bit. And we'll set the first one here. I'm going to put him into the assault mode. The second one I'm going to put into the cover mode. And the farthest one away we're going to set to the heavy mode. So I'll go ahead and save. And let's test it out. So if we go and take cover here, I'm going to shoot at the first guy. And he's aware of our presence. Now the question comes up. How do we set it up so that the other enemies become aware? Now, one thing you're going to notice is, first off, they're not noticing any sound. And that's not the way the actual AR perception module works. There's actually an event that makes a sound event that the AI perception reacts to. So just playing a sound in the environment is not going to trigger these guys in any way, shape, or form. But we kind of also want it so that they're going to be like, hey, and tell their friends that are real close by that there's something going on here. So in order to do that, we're going to go back into our base enemy character, and we're going to open up the set to combat function. So right now, when we call a set to combat function, it checks our combat status. If we're not in combat, it will go ahead. Some of these lines got a little bit crossed when we converted it over to a function. So I'll throw in these rewrote nodes here to kind of clarify it up a little bit. But so it finds out if we're in the combat status. If it is, it sets our player character, and then it sets our combat status. What we can also do while we're here is we can go ahead and notify their buddies that are close by. So in order to do that, I'm going to use the sphere overlap actors once again. And we're going to drag out, search for that sphere overlap actors. And we have to enter a position here. So I'm going to right click on the graph, and we're going to get actor location. And we're going to go ahead and plug this into the sphere position. And then we're going to need a radius here. I'm going to set this to 1,000. So that way any other enemies that within 10 meters are going to go ahead and get notified that they're entering the combat status. And then we're going to have to list object types. So I'm going to go ahead and right click. I'm going to search for make array. And we're going to plug this array into the object types. And for the type here, I'm going to set this to pawn. Then we're going to have to set the actor class filter. So we're going to search for our base enemy. And we'll select the base enemy character blueprint. And so now it's going to give us an array with a reference to all of the other enemies that are within 10 meters of our current enemy that has just entered the combat state. So we have this array, and we're going to drag out for it. And we're going to search for a for each loop. And this might look very familiar. We've already done this. So for each one of the actors that is listed in the array, we want to go ahead and cast to the enemy character. So I'll cast to base enemy character blueprint. And then we're just going to simply go ahead and call the set combat function. And then we have a sense pawn, so we'll go ahead and we'll drag the reference to player character, which we've already set. And we'll connect the as base enemy character into the target. And we're going to grab this return node and we're going to drag it down here because we're going to connect this completed node to the return node. And I'll go ahead and compile and save. So what we're doing now is when we get the notification or the function to set to combat is called, we're going to go ahead and check our combat status and make sure that we're not already in combat. If we are not in combat, we're going to go ahead and cast the pawn that we saw to our 3P player character. We're going to set our player character. And we're going to set our status to combat. And we're also going to generate a sphere. And it's going to be a 10-meter sphere from where we're located. And it's going to search for all pawns. And then it's going to filter the enemy base character that we have. And then for each one of the pawns that it finds, it's going to go ahead and cast to the based enemy character. And then it's going to go ahead and set them to combat. And if this ends up overlapping over a character that's already set to combat, so if we have 3 of these guys, and the first guy gets set to combat, he pops the sphere and tells the other 2 to set to combat, they're going to perform the same exact function here, but they're already going to be set to combat. So when it gets to the branch here to check to see if we're already in combat, it is not going to repop the sphere again. Because what happens if we don't end up checking for our combat status at the very beginning here is we can get into a loop cycle where all the AIs will end up creating the sphere and recalling this set to combat function over and over. So it's definitely important to have this checked to see if we're in a combat status first. So I'm going to go ahead and compile and save. And we can close out of our base enemy character. And let's go ahead and test it out. So go ahead and hit play, and I will just take cover here, and we're just going to end up shooting the first guy in line, and all 3 of the characters end up reacting to us. So the assault character comes at us and starts firing with a shotgun. Our cover guy and the sniper rifle guy both popped up, slightly different times from each other, although they just happen to line up with getting into cover. And we can definitely mess around with the timings later on. And we can even test it out with more of these guys. So if I actually grab 3 of these guys, and I'm just going to duplicate them again. We're going to leave it as is. So I'm just going to drag them out like this. And one other thing I did notice too that I guess, yeah, we'll go ahead and take care of that while I have it up. Right now these guys are all in the guard state, but they're showing the targets for the patrol mode. So we'll just open up the base enemy character again, and we'll go into the construction script. And up here, when we check the combat status, if we are in patrol, we're setting it to visible. But we're not doing anything when we're in guard or in combat. So I'm actually going to go ahead and duplicate this twice. And we'll go ahead and plug the first row into the guard, the second row into the patrol, and the final row into the combat. And then we can connect up each one of these billboards that we have to the targets. And we'll do the same thing for the second row as well. And then for guard and for combat, we want these to be not visible. So for the top row and the bottom row here, the new visibility is going to be set to false on both, for both guard and combat. So we'll go ahead and compile and save. And if we go back into our map, we save all. We will no longer see the targets for the patrol mode. So let's go ahead and hit play and test this out. I'm going to go ahead and take cover. We're going to go ahead and fire at the first guy. And it's going to chain effect down. So all the enemies in a row there are going to get notified that there's combat going on, and they're going to react to us. And then they're all kind of firing at variable different times, although some of them kind of line up with when they pop out of cover and when they don't. So you can just basically fix this by changing up the variation in time based on the wait times in the behavior tree when they wait between firing and not firing. And the other thing I would like to take care of while I'm at it too is if I take aim and fire across the map, it takes a while for our rounds to get there. Right now they're using the default projectile speed, I believe, if I remember correctly. But like the shotgun's going to fire slower than a rifle, and the sniper rifles are going to fire much quicker than a assault rifle round. So we can actually end up fixing this by going into the projectiles. And we can open each one of our projectiles up and set a speed for them. So we can start out with the shotgun projectile here. If we go into the projectile movement, there's the value of the initial speed, and this is how fast it's going to be moving. One thing to be careful with the initial speed is the fact that if you go over a certain value, and I'm not sure exactly where it sits, but anything over like 40,000, the physics reactions get really weird. Only because the projectiles will travel faster than the frame rate of the machine, and you'll get weird effects where it goes to calculate one frame and the projectile is on one side of an obstacle, and when it goes to calculate the next frame, it'll be on the other side of the obstacle. So there'll be issues where it won't necessarily interact with objects in the environment because it's never rendered to collide with the environment. So you don't want to get really high with these values on the projectiles. I mean, you can go ahead and try and push it, but if you get events where it doesn't end up reacting with something the way it should, you're probably going to have to dial back the speed a bit. So for the shotgun here, we have it set at 5,000. I'm going to be fine with 5,000. So we'll close our shotgun projectile. I'll open up our assault rifle projectile, and we'll select the projectile movement once again. And then for the initial speed here, I'm going to set this to 10,000. So it's going to move at twice the rate of the shotgun projectile. And then we'll open up our sniper rifle projectile as well. Go into the projectile movement. And for the initial speed here, it's going to travel even faster than the assault rifle round would. So I'm going to set this to, if we left it off at 10,000 there, I'm going to set it to 15,000. And we'll compile and save. And we can actually close out our projectiles. And I will save all. And we can test it out one last time. So if I go ahead and hit cover, I'm going to shoot at the first guy. they all react to me. So we got the two shotgun guys coming up on me. And if we end up like firing and strafing around, you'll notice that there's less lead on the rounds that's required. And the same is going to be true for the sniper rifle when the AI ends up firing it. So yeah, when the sniper rifle ends up firing, the rounds are going to get to us much quicker, and there's going to be a lot less lead time involved. So I'm going to be happy with that. And that's going to complete today's video. If you have any questions or comments, go ahead and leave them down below. And thanks for watching.